The wind that scours the high Iranian plateau carries no memory, only sand. It sweeps across a vast, raised terrace of stone, whispering through the stubs of colossal columns and over the intricate faces of kings and griffins carved in silent procession. This is Persepolis, or what remains of it. A skeleton of impossible grandeur, picked clean by time and conquest. For centuries, it was little more than a legend, a place the locals called Takhta Jamshid, the throne of Jamshid, a mythical king. Its silence was profound, its purpose, a riddle. Early European travelers who stumbled upon the ruins could only guess at their origin, attributing them to ancient Hebrews or forgotten dynasties. The prevailing story, inherited from Greek historians, was of a decadent capital built by despotic kings, using the blood and sweat of 1 million slaves, a monument to tyranny that was righteously destroyed. But then, in the 1930s, an archaeological team exploring the scorched foundations of the city's ramparts made a discovery that would shatter the Greek narrative and force the stones to speak a new truth. They were not treasures of gold or silver, but something far more valuable, thousands of small, unassuming clay tablets. Many were fragmented, all were inscribed with a dense, wedge-shaped script. As these tablets were painstakingly deciphered, a new story emerged, one that contradicted the accepted history. They were not grand pronouncements of kings, but payroll records. Meticulous, detailed accounts of payments in wine, grain, and silver to the very people who built this city. They listed stonemasons from Egypt, woodworkers from Lydia, goldsmiths from Babylonia, and they were not slaves. They were paid laborers, skilled artisans, men and women from every corner of a vast empire, who came here not in chains, but as respected workers on a monumental project. The discovery was a quiet earthquake. It revealed that the story of Persepolis was not one of oppression, but of something far more complex and revolutionary, a vision of a unified world administered with breathtaking efficiency, built with pride. The silent ruins were not a tomb of a tyranny, but the ghost of a utopia. The central mystery shifted. If this was a place of such order and vision, what unspeakable violence had been required to silence it? The investigation was no longer about a fallen city, but about a murdered dream, and the clues lay buried not just in the earth, but in the biased, bitter histories of its destroyers. The trail to understanding what happened here began with one man, a king who dared to imagine a new kind of world. The story of Persepolis begins not with a stone, but with a crisis of identity. In 522 BC, the vast Achaemenid Empire, the largest the world had yet seen, was on the brink of collapse. A usurper had seized the throne, and the great territorial satrapies, from Egypt to the Indus Valley, had erupted in rebellion. Into this chaos stepped a man named Darius, a distant cousin of the royal line, a brilliant general and a political genius. In a single brutal year, he fought 19 battles, crushed 9 rebel kings, and stitched the fractured empire back together. But Darius knew that conquest by the sword was fleeting. To rule dozens of nations, each with its own gods, languages, and traditions, required more than fear. It required a shared idea. He needed to create a symbol of his new order, a place that would embody the philosophy of his reign, unity through diversity, power through consent, divinely sanctioned. Susa, Babylon, Ecbatana. These were the old administrative capitals, steeped in their own histories of conquest. Darius needed something new, a place untainted by past grievances, a ceremonial heart for his reborn empire. He envisioned a city that would not be a seat of government, but a stage, a place where the grandeur and justice of his rule could be made manifest, where the nations of the world would gather not as vanquished foes, but as willing participants in a global project. He needed a declaration in stone. He chose a site in the heart of Persis, the Achaemenid homeland, a vast, empty plain at the foot of a mountain. The locals called Kuahe, Ramat, the Mountain of Mercy. It was a strategic choice, remote enough to be secure, yet central enough to be accessible from the great royal roads he was building. But the choice was more than strategic. It was spiritual. He would build his city on a colossal stone terrace, leveling and raising a platform of 1.3 million square feet, carving it directly from the living rock of the mountain. The city would not just sit on the land, it would grow from it, an extension of the sacred mountain itself. This was to be Parsa, the city of the Persians, a place we now know by its Greek name, Persepolis. The vision was breathtaking in its ambition. It would be a city of colossal halls, of soaring columns that seemed to touch the sky, of intricate carvings that would tell the story of his empire. And it would be built not by the whipped slaves of his enemies' propaganda, but by the finest craftsmen the world had to offer. Their skills brought together in a harmonious collaboration that would mirror the harmonious collaboration of the empire itself. The first task was to level the terrace, a monumental feat of engineering. Gangs of laborers, their wages and rations meticulously recorded on the clay tablets that would one day be their testament, quarried and moved massive blocks of stone. They constructed a complex system of cisterns and drainage channels, a subterranean circulatory system for the city that was yet to be born. As Darius stood on that raw, windswept platform, looking out over the plains, he was not just seeing a construction site, he was seeing the physical manifestation of his legacy, a city that would proclaim his truth to the world, a testament to a new world order built on a foundation of justice, order, and divine right. He had no way of knowing he was also laying the foundation for a tragedy, that the very grandeur he was planning would one day attract a firestorm that would consume it all. The genius of Persepolis was not just in its scale, but in its execution. Darius was not merely a king, he was the CEO of the largest multinational corporation the world had ever seen, and he ran the construction of his ceremonial city with an administrative rigor that was, for its time, miraculous. The evidence lies in the thousands of clay tablets unearthed from the ashes of the city's archives. They reveal a project managed with obsessive detail. The workers, as the tablets show, were a microcosm of the empire itself. Lydian craftsmen, renowned for their fine metalwork, came from the west. Babylonians, masters of brickwork and glazing, traveled from Mesopotamia. Egyptians, with their centuries of experience in monumental stone carving, were brought from the Nile Valley. Each group brought their unique skills, their artistic traditions, and their languages, yet they worked together under a unified architectural plan. This was not a clash of cultures, but a carefully orchestrated symphony of styles, creating something entirely new, a distinctly Achaemenid aesthetic. The tablets paint a vivid picture of life on the construction site. They are not grand, sweeping documents, but the mundane, essential paperwork of a massive enterprise. A receipt for a herd of goats to be used for workers' rations. A payroll record for a team of stonemasons, listing each man by name and the amount of wine and grain he received as his monthly wage. There are even records of maternity leave, with new mothers and their infants receiving double rations for a month after birth. This was a system that recognized the humanity of its workforce. It understood that a skilled, well-fed artisan was a productive artisan. This was a stark contrast to the great works of other ancient civilizations built on the backs of captive populations. Persepolis was built by free men, paid for their labor, their welfare, a matter of state concern. The administrative structure was hierarchical and efficient. Supervisors oversaw teams of workers, their performance tracked, their supply needs logged. Scribes, using the cuneiform script on wet clay, were embedded in every part of the project, their tablets forming a real-time data stream that allowed the king's planners to manage logistics on an unprecedented scale. They could track the flow of materials, from the giant cedar logs imported from the forests of Lebanon to the precious gold and lapis lazuli brought from the eastern frontiers. This level of bureaucratic sophistication was the true foundation of the Achaemenid Empire's power. The grandeur of the stone palaces was merely the outward expression of the organizational genius that held it all together. As the first great structures began to rise from the terrace, they were a testament to this new way of thinking. This was a city built not by the crack of a whip, but by the scratch of a stylus on a clay tablet. It was a monument to logistics as much as to royalty, a testament to the idea that the greatest strength of an empire lay not in the force of its armies, but in the meticulous order of its administration. Each paid wage was a thread in the fabric of the empire, each ration of wine a toast to a system that valued its people. At the heart of Darius's grand vision, rising majestically from the center of the stone terrace, was the Apadana. This was not merely a palace, but a grand audience hall, a vast columned space designed to awe and inspire. It was the architectural embodiment of the Achaemenid philosophy of kingship, a stage for the carefully orchestrated theater of power. The construction of the Apadana was an undertaking of immense complexity. Its square main hall measured over 200 feet on each side. Its roof, crafted from the finest cedar of Lebanon, was supported by 36 colossal columns, each soaring to a height of over 60 feet. These were not monolithic shafts of stone, but slender, fluted columns topped with elaborate capitals shaped like twin-headed bulls or griffins, symbols of power and divinity. The effect was not one of heavy, oppressive weight, but of a light, airy forest of stone, reaching towards the heavens. The Apadana was approached by two monumental staircases on its north and east sides. These were not simply functional structures, but grand canvases for the story the king wanted to tell. Their stone facades were covered in intricate, low-relief carvings, a visual narrative of the empire's power and harmony. Here, the art of Persepolis found its most eloquent expression. Unlike the art of the Assyrians, which celebrated brutal conquest and the flaying of enemies, the reliefs of the Apadana depicted order, stability, and mutual respect. Endless lines of Persian and Median nobles, the elite of the empire, are shown in conversation, their hands resting gently on each other's shoulders in a sign of friendship and equality. They are dressed in fine robes, their curled beards and hair rendered with meticulous detail. They ascend the stairs not as a conquering army, but as hosts, ready to welcome the world. The purpose of the Apadana was to serve as the setting for the great receptions held during Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which fell on the spring equinox. This was the most important festival in the Achaemenid calendar, a time of rebirth and renewal. On this day, delegations from every corner of the vast empire, all the 23 subject nations, would ascend these stairs to pay homage and present their tribute to the King of Kings. The design of the hall was a masterclass in psychological stagecraft. The delegates would enter the Gate of All Nations, pass through long corridors flanked by soldiers, and finally emerge into the vast, sun-drenched courtyard before the Apadana. They would then climb the great staircase, the carved figures of their own countrymen seeming to walk alongside them, a reminder that they were part of this grand imperial family. Finally, they would enter the hall itself, the forest of columns dwarfing them, leading their eyes towards the raised throne of the king. It was a journey designed to impress upon every visitor the immense power and reach of the empire, but also their own accepted place within it. It was a declaration that they were not slaves, but partners in the grandest political enterprise on earth. The Apadana was more than a building. It was the empire in microcosm, a place where all the diverse threads of a multinational world were woven together into a single, magnificent tapestry, held together by the power and vision of a single man. The twin staircases of the Apadana are the most important historical document at Persepolis. They are a library carved in stone, a detailed, propagandistic, and breathtakingly beautiful depiction of the Achaemenid Empire as it saw itself. To walk along these reliefs is to read the official story of a lost world. The central theme is the Great Nowruz Procession, the parade of nations coming to honor the King of Kings. Each delegation is depicted with an astonishing attention to ethnographic detail, a testament to the empire's deep awareness of its own diversity. The artists, likely guided by court officials, took great care to render the distinct clothing, hairstyles, and physical features of each group. The Medes, close partners to the Persians, are shown in their rounded felt caps and short swords. The Elamites, from the lowlands of Susiana, wear long robes and carry bows. The Babylonians, with their thick, square beards, bring bowls of precious metal. The Lydians, from western Anatolia, offer intricate vases and bracelets, a nod to their famed craftsmanship. Further along the procession come the more exotic delegations from the empire's distant frontiers. The Scythians, nomadic warriors from the Central Asian steppes, are instantly recognizable by their pointed hoods and tailored trousers, leading a magnificent stallion as their gift. The Ethiopians, with their distinct curly hair, carry a giraffe's tusk and a vessel of gold dust. The Indians, from the satrapy of Hindush, are shown in simple loincloths, one carrying jars of spices on a yoke across his shoulders, another accompanied by a donkey. What is most remarkable about these depictions is the tone. There is no sense of humiliation or defeat. Each delegation is led by a Persian or Median usher who holds the hand of the lead delegate in a gesture of friendship and guidance, not coercion. The gift-bearers walk with dignity and pride. They are not shown prostrating themselves or groveling before a conqueror. They are portrayed as respected representatives of their nations, willingly participating in the central ceremony of the empire. This was a carefully crafted piece of political messaging. The reliefs told the assembled world that the Achaemenid Empire was not a tyranny built on force, but a commonwealth of nations, a family of peoples guided by the benevolent hand of the Persian king. It was a message of Pax Persica, a Persian peace, where diverse cultures could flourish under the protection of a just and orderly system. The details are a historian's dream. The types of weapons, the styles of shoes, the breeds of horses and camels all provide invaluable information about the material culture of the ancient world. But the overall impression is what truly matters. The endless rhythmic procession, carved with a serene and confident precision, creates a sense of eternal, unchanging order. This is how the empire was meant to be, forever. This was the ideal, frozen in stone for all time. As a delegate from a far-flung corner of the empire walked up these stairs, he would see himself and his people, not as a conquered subject, but as an integral part of this magnificent, eternal parade. The stone told him he belonged. It was a powerful and seductive message, a masterpiece of propaganda designed to win the hearts and minds of a complex, multicultural world. When Darius the Great died in 486 BC, the grand project of Persepolis was far from complete. The Apadana was still under construction, its great columns rising, but its intricate reliefs unfinished. The task of completing the vision fell to his son and successor, Xerxes. History, largely written by his Greek enemies, has painted Xerxes as a hubristic tyrant, a man of unchecked ambition and spectacular failure. But the stones of Persepolis tell a different story, one of a son determined to honor and expand upon his father's legacy. Xerxes' most significant addition to the terrace was the monumental entrance gate, the Gate of All Nations. This was the formal entryway to the ceremonial heart of the city, and its design was a powerful statement of imperial ideology. The gateway was a massive square hall, its roof supported by 4 stone columns. Guarding its eastern and western entrances were colossal pairs of lamassu, ancient Mesopotamian protective deities with the bodies of winged bulls and the heads of bearded men. These were not just decorations, they were a deliberate appropriation of an ancient symbol of power, a message to the older civilizations of the empire, like Babylonia and Assyria, that the Achaemenid king was the rightful heir to their legacy of greatness. An inscription carved in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, was repeated on the gateway, leaving no doubt as to its creator and purpose. "I am Xerxes," it proclaims, "the great king, king of kings, king of all nations. By the grace of Ahura Mazda, I built this gate of all nations." It was a bold declaration of his own power and a continuation of his father's vision of a universal empire. Xerxes also oversaw the completion of the Apadana, finishing the great staircases and their reliefs. But he also embarked on his own massive building projects. He constructed the Hall of 100 Columns, a throne hall even larger than the Apadana, intended for more administrative functions and the reception of military commanders. And he built for himself a private palace, the Hadish, which stood on the highest part of the terrace, overlooking the entire complex. Its name has been translated as the dwelling place, a deceptively simple name for a lavishly decorated palace. But Xerxes' reign was not defined solely by construction. It was dominated by the shadow from the west. The Greco-Persian Wars, which had begun under Darius, escalated dramatically under his son. Xerxes amassed a huge army and navy to invade the Greek mainland, a campaign that would ultimately end in defeat at Salamis and Plataea. His most infamous act during this war was the burning of Athens in 480 BC, an act of retribution for the earlier Greek burning of the Persian city of Sardis. It was a brutal act of war, and it would have unforeseen and catastrophic consequences. The Greeks would never forget it. For generations, the memory of the sack of Athens would be used to stoke anti-Persian sentiment. It became a rallying cry, a justification for a future war of revenge. As Xerxes walked the grand halls of his expanding city, inspecting the reliefs that depicted a world of peace and harmony, he could not have known that his actions 1,000 miles away were planting the seeds of his city's destruction. The smoke from the burning Acropolis would hang in the historical memory of the Greek world, a debt that, a century and a half later, a young king from Macedon would come to collect, paying it back with an inferno that would consume Persepolis itself. Persepolis was a city of contradictions. Despite its monumental palaces and halls, it was not a capital in the way we understand the term today. It was not the administrative heart of the empire. That role was shared by Susa, Babylon, and Ecbatana, cities with established bureaucracies and strategic locations on major trade routes. Persepolis was something else entirely. It was the ceremonial and spiritual soul of the Achaemenid world, a place with a very specific and sacred purpose. Its primary function was to serve as the magnificent stage for the celebration of Nowruz, the Persian New Year. Held on the spring equinox, Nowruz was a festival of deep symbolic importance, representing the victory of light over darkness, of life over death, of cosmic order over chaos. It was the perfect moment for the empire to reaffirm its own existence and the divine mandate of its king. The entire design of the city was geared towards this one annual event. The procession of delegates depicted on the Apadana reliefs was not just a piece of art, it was a script, a blueprint for the ceremony itself. For weeks leading up to the equinox, delegations from every satrapy would travel the royal roads, converging on the plains before the Great Terrace. They brought with them not just tribute, but the finest examples of their local craftsmanship, their native animals, their culture made manifest. The festival was a carefully choreographed piece of political theater. It began with the king himself, in his role as the chief priest, performing the sacred rites to welcome the new year. Then, the grand procession would begin. The delegations would ascend the staircases, their real-life procession mirroring the one carved in stone, a powerful merging of the real and the ideal. Inside the Apadana, they would be received by the King of Kings, seated on his throne, the living embodiment of the god Ahura Mazda's will on earth. They would present their gifts, a tangible symbol of their region's loyalty and its contribution to the wealth of the empire. But it was more than just a tax collection. It was a renewal of the covenant between the ruler and the ruled. The king, by accepting their gifts, pledged to protect them, to ensure justice, and to maintain the peace that allowed their cultures to thrive. The festival would last for days, filled with feasting, music, and games. It was the one time of year when the vast, abstract concept of the empire became a living, breathing reality. A Scythian horseman could rub shoulders with an Egyptian priest, a Babylonian merchant could share wine with a Greek artisan. It was a carefully managed display of multicultural harmony, a powerful propaganda tool that reinforced the idea that all nations were part of a single, prosperous family under the benevolent rule of the Achaemenid king. For the rest of the year, Persepolis was quiet. A skeleton crew of administrators and priests maintained the site, but the great hall stood empty, silent witnesses to the brief, glorious burst of life they hosted each spring. This cyclical nature made the city unique. It was not a bustling metropolis, but a sacred precinct, a place that existed slightly outside of time, waiting to be reborn with the spring sun each year. It was a city built for a single, perfect moment, a recurring dream of imperial unity. While the great public halls like the Apadana and the Hall of 100 Columns were designed to project an image of formal power and universal order, Persepolis was also a place of residence, home to a complex and often hidden world of courtly life. The private palaces of the kings, nestled on the southern and eastern parts of the terrace, tell a more intimate story of the men who ruled the largest empire on earth. The Tachara, or Winter Palace, was started by Darius and completed by Xerxes. It was a smaller, more intimate structure than the grand audience halls. Its stone reliefs depicting servants carrying food and animals for the royal table, a glimpse into the daily domestic life of the court. The quality of the stonework here is considered the finest on the entire terrace, its polished surfaces gleaming like black marble. The doorways show the king in his royal robes, a serene and powerful figure. But the context is domestic, not ceremonial. This was a place for the king to retreat from the overwhelming scale of his public duties. The largest of the palaces was the Hadish, the personal residence of Xerxes. Situated on the highest point of the terrace, it commanded a view of the entire complex, a physical representation of the king's supreme authority. Its name, dwelling place, belies its lavishness. Though heavily damaged by the final fire, archaeological evidence suggests it was a place of incredible luxury, with vast columned halls, private courtyards, and walls adorned with vibrant paintings and precious inlays. It was here, and in the sprawling harem quarters nearby, that the intricate and often dangerous politics of the court played out. The Achaemenid court was a complex ecosystem of nobles, generals, priests, eunuchs, and royal women, all vying for influence and favor. The king, while an absolute monarch, was not immune to the pressures of these competing factions. The succession was a particularly fraught issue. While the king had a chief wife, he also had numerous other wives and concubines, resulting in a multitude of sons, all with a potential claim to the throne. This created a hotbed of intrigue, with queen mothers and ambitious princes plotting in the secluded corridors of the harem. The reliefs and the private palaces reflect this reality. They often depict the king followed by attendants carrying a parasol and a fly whisk, symbols not just of comfort, but of protection. Other reliefs show the king in a heroic pose, slaying a mythical beast like a lion or a griffin. These were not just artistic flourishes, they were ideological statements, portraying the king as the protector of the cosmic order, the one who vanquishes the forces of chaos, both external and, implicitly, internal. The private world of Persepolis was a place of immense privilege and luxury, but it was also a gilded cage. The king was surrounded by protocol, his every move watched. The silent, smiling figures on the reliefs give no hint of the betrayals, assassinations, and power struggles that marked the later history of the Achaemenid dynasty. But the very existence of these private, heavily guarded spaces tells its own story. It reveals that even the most powerful man in the world needed a place to retreat, a fortress within the fortress, to protect himself from the dangers that lurked not on the distant frontiers of his empire, but in the whispering hallways of his own home. If the Apadana was the soul of Persepolis and the palaces were its heart, then the treasury was its formidable gut. Located in the southeastern corner of the terrace, this was not a single building, but a sprawling complex of halls and storerooms, a fortified labyrinth that served as the central bank and repository for the immense wealth of the empire. The tribute that flowed into Persepolis from the 23 subject nations during the Nowruz festival ended up here. The reliefs on the Apadana stairs show a sanitized, ceremonial version of this process, but the reality was a logistical operation of staggering scale. The gifts of gold, silver, precious stones, and exotic goods were meticulously recorded by an army of scribes before being stored in the treasury's heavily guarded vaults. Greek historians, often prone to exaggeration but likely not far from the truth in this case, wrote of the fabulous wealth stored at Persepolis. They described rooms filled to the ceiling with gold and silver bullion, coins from every corner of the known world, and priceless artifacts looted from conquered temples in Egypt and Babylonia. This was not just idle wealth, it was the strategic reserve of the empire, the financial muscle that funded its armies, its vast construction projects, and its complex bureaucracy. The security of the treasury was paramount. It was a fortress within the larger fortress of the terrace, its walls thick, its entrances few and heavily defended by the king's elite guard, the Immortals. The complex was a maze of long, narrow halls designed to be easily sealed and defended in the event of an attack. But the treasury held something far more valuable to history than gold. It was also the home of the Persepolis Administrative Archives. In one of the main halls, archaeologists unearthed the motherlode of clay tablets that would revolutionize our understanding of the Achaemenid Empire. Tens of thousands of these cuneiform documents were stored here, the day-to-day paperwork of a global superpower. These tablets, inscribed in Elamite, were the working documents of the Persepolitan administration. They recorded everything: the wages of the workers who built the city, the rations for the horses of the royal cavalry, the movement of supplies along the royal road, the administration of the royal estates. They provide an unprecedented ground-level view of the empire's economy. They reveal a complex system of production and redistribution, a command economy managed with a level of detail that seems almost modern. The names on the tablets are a roll call of the ancient world: Persians, Medes, Egyptians, Greeks, Indians, all working within the same vast administrative system. The great irony is that these fragile, invaluable documents survived because of the very catastrophe that destroyed the city. When the final fire tore through the treasury, the intense heat baked the sun-dried clay tablets into hard ceramic, firing them as if in a kiln. The fire that consumed the ephemeral wealth of gold and silver accidentally preserved the true treasure of Persepolis, its memory recorded in the humble bureaucratic script of its administrators. The treasury, therefore, represents the ultimate duality of the city. It was a symbol of unimaginable material wealth, the kind of concentrated treasure that would inevitably attract the greed of conquerors. Its vaults were a siren call to future looters, a prize that would make its destruction almost inevitable. But it was also a repository of knowledge, an archive whose accidental preservation would one day allow the silent city to tell its own story in its own words and finally challenge the hostile narratives of its enemies. The wealth made it a target. The paperwork made it immortal. The stone walls of Persepolis are a testament to the power of ideology. Every carved image, from the grand processions of the Appadana to the intimate scenes in the private palaces, was carefully chosen to convey a specific message about the nature of Achaemenid kingship and the order of the world. It was a visual language designed to be understood by the diverse, illiterate populations of a multinational empire. A central and recurring theme is the figure of the king as a cosmic hero. In numerous reliefs, particularly on the doorways of the palaces, the king is depicted in a stylized combat with a monstrous creature, a lion, a winged griffin, or a bull. The king, always portrayed as calm and resolute, grasps the beast by a horn or its throat and plunges a short sword into its belly. This is not a depiction of a literal royal hunt. It is a powerful metaphor. The monstrous creatures represent the forces of chaos, of lies, of disorder, what the Persians called droga. The king, as the chosen agent of the supreme god Ahura Mazda, is the one who vanquishes this chaos and establishes Asha, the cosmic order of truth, justice, and stability. This image reinforced the king's role as the guarantor of peace and security for the entire empire. He was not just a political leader, he was a warrior priest, a hero fighting a perpetual battle against the darkness for the good of all his subjects. Another potent symbol that appears throughout Persepolis is the Faravahar, a winged disc from which the upper body of a bearded man emerges. This is often interpreted as a representation of Ahura Mazda himself, or perhaps the divine glory, Yukvarena, that was bestowed upon the rightful king. In many reliefs, the Faravahar floats above the king, its hand raised in a gesture of blessing, a constant visual reminder that the king's rule was not based on mere military might, but on divine sanction. This connection to the divine was the ultimate source of the king's legitimacy. He ruled because he was chosen by the creator of the universe to uphold truth and order on earth. The ideology was also one of inclusivity, at least on the surface. While the Persians and their close cousins, the Medes, are clearly depicted as the ruling elite, the other nations of the empire are shown as respected partners. The Gate of All Nations explicitly welcomes people from across the known world. The Appadana reliefs celebrate their diversity. This was a key part of the Achaemenid formula for successful rule. By allowing subject peoples to retain their own customs, religions, and languages, and by incorporating their elites into the imperial structure, the Persian kings fostered a sense of belonging and reduced the likelihood of rebellion. They ruled a multicultural empire by embracing multiculturalism. This carefully constructed ideology, carved into the very fabric of the city, was a powerful tool of statecraft. It presented a vision of a harmonious, divinely ordered world, presided over by a just and heroic king. It was a story of peace and prosperity, a promise of stability in a dangerous world. For over a century, this story was largely successful. The empire held together, a testament to the power of the ideas that were given such magnificent, enduring form on the terrace of Persepolis. But no ideology, no matter how powerful, is immune to the ambitions of men. And no stone, no matter how well carved, can stand forever against the threat of fire. After the reigns of Darius and Xerxes, the great creative burst of construction at Persepolis began to slow. The city was largely complete, a magnificent testament to the vision of its founders. For the next century, under a succession of later kings like Artaxerxes I and Darius II, the Achaemenid Empire entered a new phase. It was no longer a young, expansionist power, but a mature, established superpower, focused more on consolidation and defense than on new conquests. Persepolis remained the ceremonial heart of this empire, and the Nowruz festival continued to be celebrated with lavish splendor each spring. The great halls would fill with the chatter of 100 languages, the scent of exotic spices, and the vibrant colors of robes from distant lands. The tribute from the satrapies continued to fill the vaults of the treasury. From the outside, the empire still projected an image of immense power and eternal stability, the same image so confidently carved into the stone reliefs of the city. But beneath this placid surface, the cracks were beginning to show. The later Achaemenid period was marked by increasing internal strife. The harem intrigues that had always been a feature of the court grew more deadly. Several kings came to the throne through assassination and fratricide. The centralized administrative genius of Darius the Great began to fray at the edges, and powerful satraps in distant provinces grew more autonomous, occasionally rising in open rebellion. The most significant challenge came from Egypt, which successfully broke away from the empire for a period of 60 years, a major blow to Persian prestige. There were also constant tensions on the western frontier with the fractious city-states of Greece. The Persians engaged in a complex game of diplomacy and proxy warfare, funding different Greek factions to keep them divided and weak. This policy, known as medizing, was largely successful, but it fostered a deep and abiding resentment among the Greeks, who saw it as a corrupting influence on their freedom. This century was a long, slow-burning fuse. The empire, while still immensely powerful, was losing its internal cohesion. The visionary zeal of its founders was replaced by a more cynical and pragmatic effort to simply maintain the status quo. The very success and wealth of the empire bred a degree of complacency. The great kings had created a system so vast and so rich that it seemed indestructible, eternal. They could not imagine a threat so great that it could topple their world order. From their magnificent palaces at Persepolis, looking down upon a world that seemed to pay them tribute in perpetuity, they were blind to the storm gathering in the west. In the small, mountainous kingdom of Macedon, on the northern fringe of the Greek world, a new kind of power was being forged. It was a power based not on diplomacy or multicultural tolerance, but on a revolutionary new way of warfare and the boundless, terrifying ambition of a single man. The silent, ceremonial city of Persepolis, lost in its dreams of eternal order, had no idea that its nemesis was being born, a man who would one day march across Asia with a spear in his hand and a grudge in his heart. The countdown to the inferno had begun. In 336 BC, a young man named Alexander ascended to the throne of Macedon. He was just 20 years old, but he inherited from his father, Philip II, two things that would change the course of history: a revolutionary, professional army, and a dream of conquering the Persian Empire. Alexander was a man of startling, almost terrifying contradictions. He was a military genius, capable of brilliant strategic thinking and reckless personal bravery. He was a student of Aristotle, with a genuine love for Greek culture, poetry, and philosophy. He was also a ruthless politician, a heavy drinker, and a man driven by an almost superhuman ambition, a burning desire to surpass the heroes of Greek myth and prove himself the greatest man who had ever lived. For the Greeks, the Persian Empire was the great other, a symbol of Eastern despotism and luxury that stood in opposition to their own ideals of freedom and self-determination. The memory of the Persian invasions under Darius and Xerxes, and especially the burning of Athens, was a deep, collective wound. Alexander seized upon this history. He framed his planned invasion not as a war of conquest, but as a pan-Hellenic crusade, a great war of revenge to liberate the Greek cities of Ionia and to punish the Persians for their past transgressions. It was a masterful piece of propaganda that unified the quarrelsome Greek states behind him. In 334 BC, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia with an army of around 40,000 men. It was a small force compared to the vast armies the Persians could theoretically muster, but it was a highly disciplined, professional fighting machine. Its core was the Macedonian phalanx, a formation of soldiers armed with incredibly long pikes called sarissas, which presented an almost impenetrable wall of spear points to the enemy. This was supported by elite heavy cavalry, the companions, led by Alexander himself. The Persian Empire, under its last king, Darius III, was slow to react. They underestimated the young Macedonian king, seeing him as just another minor Greek nuisance. They dispatched a regional army to deal with him, confident that their superior numbers would crush the invaders. The two armies met at the Granicus River. The result was a stunning and decisive victory for Alexander. He personally led his cavalry in a charge across the river and smashed the Persian lines. The victory set a shockwave across the empire and opened up the entire western coast of Anatolia to the Macedonians. The War of Revenge had begun with a thunderclap, and the storm was now rolling east, directly towards the heart of the Persian world. The news of the defeat would have reached Persepolis weeks later, a distant rumor of a battle on a far-flung frontier. The nobles and priests in their serene ceremonial city could not have grasped the nature of the threat they now faced. They believed in their city's permanence, in the eternal order carved into its walls. They could not comprehend that a force was now marching towards them, that cared nothing for their ideology of harmony, a force that was about to bring the chaos they had always feared directly to their doorstep. The age of Persepolis was over. The age of Alexander had begun. The march of Alexander across the Persian Empire was a relentless 3-year blitzkrieg that shattered the foundations of the Achaemenid world. After his initial victory at the Granicus, he moved south, liberating the Greek cities of Ionia. Darius III, the Persian king, now understood the gravity of the threat. He mustered the grand army of the empire, a vast, multinational force, and marched to confront the Macedonians. The two kings met at Issus in southern Anatolia in 333 BC. Though heavily outnumbered, Alexander's superior tactics and the discipline of his army won the day. In a decisive moment, he led a cavalry charge directly at Darius's position. The Persian king, seeing his personal guard crumbling, panicked and fled the battlefield, leaving behind his army, his camp, and even his own mother and wife, who were captured by Alexander. The defeat at Issus was a devastating blow to Persian prestige. The King of Kings had been proven a coward. Alexander, by contrast, treated Darius's captured family with chivalry and respect, a calculated move that presented him as a more worthy and honorable ruler. Instead of pursuing Darius immediately, Alexander turned south, methodically securing the coastal cities of Phoenicia and Egypt. He wanted to neutralize the powerful Persian navy and secure his supply lines before striking at the heart of the empire. This strategic patience demonstrated his genius. He wasn't just a reckless warrior, he was a master strategist. By 3031 BC, Alexander was ready for the final confrontation. He marched his army out of Egypt, deep into Mesopotamia. Darius III, in the meantime, had raised a second massive army drawn from the eastern satrapies of the empire. He chose a wide, open plain for the battlefield, near a village called Gaugamela, a place where his numerical superiority and his scythe chariots could be used to maximum effect. The Battle of Gaugamela was the final epic showdown between the two worlds. It was a tactical masterpiece by Alexander. He anticipated Darius's moves, used an oblique advance to counter the Persian numbers, and once again, at the critical moment, led a charge that broke the Persian center and forced Darius to flee. The battle was a rout. The Achaemenid army was shattered, its will to fight broken. The path to the great cities of the Persian heartland, Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, was now wide open. Darius III was now a king without an army, a fugitive in his own empire. He fled east, hoping to raise yet another force in the remote provinces of Bactria and Sogdiana. But his authority was gone. He had lost the divine glory, the Kavarena, that legitimized his rule. Alexander, meanwhile, marched his triumphant army into Babylon, where he was hailed not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The ancient city opened its gates to him. He then moved on to Susa, another of the great administrative capitals, capturing its vast treasury. He was now, for all practical purposes, the master of Persia. Only one prize remained, the greatest of them all. The ceremonial and spiritual heart of the empire, the city of the sacred flame, the repository of a century of tribute, Persepolis, the richest city in the world. As the Macedonian army turned east from Susa, marching towards the mountains of Persis, a sense of grim anticipation must have hung over them. They were no longer fighting a war of revenge. They were on their way to claim the ultimate spoils of victory. The journey from Susa to Persepolis was not an easy one. The Macedonian army had to cross the Zagros Mountains in the dead of winter, a formidable natural barrier. The Persian forces that remained loyal to Darius III had fortified a narrow pass known as the Persian Gates, hoping to hold off Alexander's advance. In a battle that echoed the famous stand of the Spartans at Thermopylae, a small Persian force under the satrap Ariobarzanes held the pass for a month against the full might of the Macedonian army. Alexander was only able to break through after a local shepherd showed him a hidden path that allowed him to outflank the defenders. The fierce resistance at the Persian gates may have hardened Alexander's heart, fueling a desire for retribution against the Persian homeland. When the Macedonian army finally descended from the mountains and onto the plains of Persis, they saw it in the distance. A great stone platform at the foot of a mountain, crowned with a forest of columns. Persepolis. The city was an open city, not designed for military defense. It was a symbol, not a fortress. As Alexander and his weary, battle-hardened soldiers rode towards it, they must have been struck with a sense of awe. They were Greeks, raised on ideals of moderation and human scale. They had never seen anything like this. The sheer, audacious grandeur of the terrace, the colossal scale of the Gate of All Nations, the endless, intricate reliefs. It was the work of a civilization that seemed to belong to a different order of being. Alexander established his camp outside the city, and a contingent of his troops, led by his general Parmenion, formally took possession of it. What they found inside the treasury confirmed the wildest rumors. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus wrote that it took 20,000 mules and 5,000 camels to carry away the treasure of Persepolis. It was the accumulated wealth of generations, a treasure so vast it would destabilize the entire economy of the ancient world when Alexander later released it as coinage. For the Macedonian soldiers, this was the ultimate payoff. They had marched for thousands of miles, fought bloody battles, and endured incredible hardships. Now, they were let loose in the richest city on earth. The looting began immediately. The soldiers, their discipline momentarily forgotten, swarmed through the palaces and storerooms, grabbing everything they could carry. They stripped the gold leaf from the walls, pried precious stones from the inlays, and smashed what they could not take. The serene, orderly city, built as a monument to harmony, was plunged into a chaos of greed and violence. The proud reliefs of the Apadana, which depicted dignified tribute-bearers, now looked down upon a scene of frenzied plunder. The irony was savage. The city that was designed to receive the wealth of the world in a gesture of peaceful ceremony was now being stripped of that wealth in an act of brutal conquest. For several months, Persepolis became the headquarters for the Macedonian army, while Alexander planned his pursuit of the fugitive Darius III. The city lived in a state of suspended animation, its beauty desecrated, its purpose gone, its fate hanging on the whim of its new master. The air was thick with tension, a feeling that the violence was not yet over, that a final, terrible act was yet to come. The final act in the tragedy of Persepolis played out not on a battlefield, but at a banquet. In the spring of 330 BC, before setting off in pursuit of Darius III, Alexander held a magnificent feast for his generals and his troops. The setting he chose was the palace of Xerxes, the Hadish, the grandest of the private residences, a place built by the very king who had burned Athens a century and a half earlier. The symbolism was potent and deliberate. The Macedonians and their Greek allies feasted in the heart of their enemy's ceremonial city, drinking from captured gold and silver goblets, surrounded by the looted luxuries of the Persian court. The wine flowed freely. It was a victory party, a celebration of their incredible conquest, but it was also an evening fraught with tension. Speeches were made, toasts were offered to Alexander's genius and the bravery of his soldiers. But as the night wore on and the drinking intensified, the mood began to shift. Old grievances, stoked by wine and the heady atmosphere of conquest, came to the surface. The talk turned to the Greco-Persian wars, to the sacrifices of their ancestors, to the sack of Athens. The call for a final symbolic act of revenge grew louder. According to the most famous account, left by the historian Diodorus Siculus, the catalyst for the final act of destruction was a woman. Her name was Thais, an Athenian courtesan who was the companion of Ptolemy, one of Alexander's closest generals. In the midst of the drunken revelry, she is said to have stood up and given a fiery speech. She declared that it would be the crowning glory of her life to have feasted in the palace of the Persian kings, and then, with her own hand, to set it on fire. It would be a just revenge, she argued, for the temples the Persians had destroyed in her home city of Athens. Her words, delivered in the charged, emotional atmosphere of the banquet, electrified the drunken crowd. The soldiers roared their approval. It was a perfect poetic act of vengeance. Alexander, caught up in the moment, his judgment clouded by wine and his own complex motivations, leapt to his feet. He seized a torch and led a wild, drunken procession out of the palace. The historical debate over this moment has raged for centuries. Was it truly a spontaneous act of drunken folly, as Diodorus's account suggests? Or was it a cold, calculated act of political theater? Other historians, like Arrian, who is generally considered more reliable, downplay the role of Thais and suggest the decision was Alexander's alone, a deliberate policy decision to signal to the Persians that the Achaemenid dynasty was well and truly over. He was not their new king, he was their conqueror. The truth is likely a mixture of both. The strategic decision was probably already made, and the drunken feast provided the perfect, dramatic pretext. Alexander was a master of propaganda, and he understood the power of a grand, symbolic gesture. He would burn the soul of the old empire to make way for his new one. As he stood before the magnificent halls of Persepolis, torch in hand, surrounded by his cheering, intoxicated army, he was at a crossroads. He was the student of Aristotle, the lover of culture, standing before one of the wonders of the world. He was also the vengeful Greek, the ruthless conqueror. In that moment, the conqueror won. The first torch was thrown by Alexander himself. It sailed through the cool night air in a fiery arc and landed in the cedar-beamed portico of the palace of Xerxes. The dry, ancient wood, seasoned by centuries of arid air, caught fire almost instantly. The flames, fed by the rich tapestries and ornate wooden furniture inside, roared to life with a terrifying hunger. What began as a drunken procession quickly devolved into a frenzy of destruction. The soldiers, their inhibitions washed away by wine and bloodlust, grabbed their own torches and ran through the complex, their drunken shouts echoing off the stone walls. They were no longer an army, they were a mob, caught in a fever of pyromania. The fire spread with astonishing speed. It leapt from the palace of Xerxes to the private quarters of Darius, the Tachera. It consumed the hall of 100 columns, its vast roof collapsing in a shower of sparks and burning embers that looked like a storm of malevolent stars. The greatest tragedy was the inferno that engulfed the Apadana. The colossal audience hall, a symbol of harmony and world order, became a roaring furnace. The 36 giant columns, which had stood for generations, were subjected to an intense heat that no stone could withstand. The limestone, rich in calcium carbonate, began to calcine, cracking and shattering under the thermal stress. The great twin-headed bull capitals, symbols of royal power, exploded in the heat, crashing to the floor in 1,000 pieces. The magnificent reliefs that lined the staircases were scorched black. The faces of the dignified tribute-bearers blistered and deformed by the flames. The vibrant paint that had once brought the carvings to life, the blues, reds, and golds, vaporized in an instant, lost forever. The city that had taken decades of meticulous, peaceful labor to build was being annihilated in a single night of drunken, nihilistic rage. The most ironic and tragic event of the night occurred in the treasury. As the fire reached the administrative archives, the flames that consumed the building and its paper and parchment records served an unintended purpose. The thousands of sun-dried clay tablets, the mundane payroll records of the empire's builders, were baked hard. The fire that destroyed the city acted like a kiln, preserving its own bureaucratic memory for future generations to discover. It was an accidental act of preservation through total destruction. From his camp on the plains below, Alexander could watch the entire terrace ablaze, a man-made volcano erupting against the blackness of the night sky. It was the funeral pyre of the Achaemenid Empire. The light from the burning city could be seen for miles, a terrible beacon signaling the end of an era. By dawn, the fire had done its work. The inferno subsided, leaving behind a smoldering, blackened ruin. The wind that had once whispered through the columned halls now carried the stench of ash and desolation. The city of the Persians, the heart of a world empire, was dead. Its soul had been ripped out, its memory erased, its grandeur reduced to a charred and smoking skeleton. The morning after the Great Fire, the smoke cleared to reveal a scene of utter devastation. The magnificent terrace of Persepolis, once a symphony of order and color, was now a monochromatic wasteland of ash, soot, and blackened stone. The towering columns of the Apadana were fractured, leaning at grotesque angles, or collapsed entirely. The proud reliefs were scarred and blackened, their intricate details obscured by a film of soot. The cedar roofs were gone, their massive beams reduced to charcoal and white ash on the palace floors. The air was thick with the smell of destruction. Alexander is said to have visited the ruins the next day, and some accounts claim he regretted his decision. But the act was done. It was an indelible stain on his legacy, an act of cultural vandalism so profound that it would be remembered for millennia. The burning of Persepolis was more than the destruction of a city. It was the erasure of a history. It was a clear and brutal message to the Persian people and the world. The Achaemenid dynasty was over. There would be no successor. A new order, a Hellenistic order, had arrived. With his work in Persepolis done, Alexander marched east in pursuit of the fugitive king, Darius III. The last Achaemenid king would never get the chance to fight another battle. He was murdered a few months later, not by Alexander, but by his own treacherous satrap, Bessus. Alexander, in a final act of political theater, had Darius's body brought to him, and he gave him a lavish royal funeral, burying him in the royal tombs near Persepolis. He then hunted down and executed Bessus, casting himself as the avenger of the rightful Persian king. He was no longer just a conqueror, he was positioning himself as the legitimate successor to the dynasty he had destroyed. The city of Persepolis was abandoned to the elements. Its ruins were so vast and its destruction so complete that it was never rebuilt. It became a ghost city, a place of haunting, tragic memory. The local people, over generations, forgot its real name and its purpose, weaving it into their own mythology as the throne of a mythical hero. And so it remained for over 2,000 years, a silent testament to a fallen empire. The wind and the sand worked on the ruins, softening the sharp edges of the broken stone, burying the lower portions of the walls. The great city slept, its true story locked away in the baked clay of its archives and the silent testimony of its scorched stones. The narrative of its destruction, written by the victorious Greeks, became the accepted truth. It was the palace of a barbarian tyrant, justly destroyed in an act of righteous vengeance. It was a simple, satisfying story that cast the West as the hero and the East as the villain. But the stones remembered. The tablets waited. The city was not truly dead, only dormant. It waited for a new kind of explorer, not a conqueror with a sword, but an archaeologist with a brush, to come and gently wake it from its long slumber and allow it, finally, to speak its own truth. A truth far more complex and far more tragic than the simple stories of its destroyers. The silence had returned to the terrace, but it was a different kind of silence now, a silence filled with the weight of what had been lost.